Thanks. I'm just going to enjoy and bask for a second here. It's been a long time since I was on stage in front of the community. My first Monitorama as well, and I miss this. Okay, that was for me. Now let's do it for you here. In 2014, James Mickens took to the Monitorama stage to deliver an absolutely transcendental talk called "Computers Are a Sadness and I Am the Cure." I am very clearly not James Mickens, for those who are a little slow in the uptake there, but his speaking style stepped off of the stage and into the pages of legend. And I aspire to one day be a legend of my own, or a cautionary tale at the very least. So now that you have the context for the talk, let's begin. So, this talk is called Build versus Buy, the final showdown. And the reason is because I asked Jason Dixon what topic he really wanted to see a talk about. That is a pro speaker tip for how to get a CFP accepted, in case you're wondering. And his answer was, I'd like to see a talk about build versus buy, because he is professionally very sad all the time. So I ignored it. And the real title of this talk is instead, Monitoring is Expensive and I Am Obnoxious, because it is and I am. Now I want to set the stage here a little bit and give a little context of why I'm talking here. I'm a consultant, and I have absolutely nothing to sell you. The one thing I consult on is AWS bills. So if you call me for anything else, like production is down, like, oh wow, that sucks, and then I hang up the phone. It is glorious. It is the best kind of problem. Someone else's. And I also, because I'm a consultant, all our systems are internal or a marketing site. I don't have a production infrastructure that I care about. You know, kind of like an SRE who's way past the point of burnout. So I sleep the sleep of the just at night. I exaggerate slightly, I have young kids. But what this means is that I get to insult absolutely everyone in this room all at once because I have zero skin in this game. I don't have a horse in the race. And that's glorious. I'm insulting you all from the cheap seats. I didn't imagine that the cheap seats were on the actual stage, but, you know, life continues to surprise as we go through it. So let's pretend for a minute here that you need to do something really complicated, like, I don't know, monitoring something. And you, in this case, are my erstwhile companion and mascot, Billy the Platypus. So let's dive in. And immediately, you're confronted by a choice when you need to implement that expensive, confusing thing. Jason asked me to talk about build versus buy as we get into this, and that always seemed like a false dichotomy, because remember, I work with AWS bills. CloudWatch is always there, it's really expensive, so you're buying something, and you have to build a shitload of stuff around it to make it in any way useful for anything. So it's like, why not both? Both seems like a good idea. But that's a separate problem. I would like to reiterate as well that this talk is entirely Jason Dixon's fault. So here's the talk you asked for and thought you wanted. I don't think you're gonna like it very much, but I assure you it is far too late to stop me now. I would also like to start with an apology to all of the vendors I am about to name. I am not picking on you specifically, but you have been included for the very best of reasons. Your logos were convenient. Thank you for sponsoring this conference. Okay, so you have to build versus buy, because the time has come where you as a company or as a manager, or God forbid as an engineer, have to decide between this, and you're going to build a business case for it. I know, you exclaim, I'm going to do a total cost of ownership analysis. And I want to start with an uncontroversial position that TCO analyses are bullshit, because they're all trying to sell something, usually badly. They're all inherently made up. They are a justification exercise that backs up a point that someone has already made. They're predetermined by whoever is presenting the thing in the first place. There's no such thing as an objective TCO analysis. Has anyone ever seen one where the analysis does not agree with what the person putting it together originally wanted to do in the first place? No, you have not. And yes, that was a rhetorical question. So on the one end of the spectrum, yeah, you have people saying, oh, buy, because they're inherently trying to sell something, which I get. Buy my company's product. And yes, that is a screenshot of the sponsor list for this very conference. Awesome. And right before I went on stage, I couldn't help but notice that it is not lost upon me that my business partner signed our own dumb little company up as a sponsor, which kind of eviscerates my point, and after this talk, he will be getting the hose. I digress. So you have vendors over in the buy corner. But now, on the other extreme of the spectrum, you have engineers who are basically justifying their own jobs on some level, or at least that's what it feels like. What they're selling is, please don't fire me and replace me with a vendor product. It comes down to bias, because bias is inherent to every one of these analyses. Let me show you some that we have all seen again and again and again in a whole bunch of different contexts. So let's say you have an analysis, and it seems that build wins. Awesome, makes sense. But very often it underestimates the staffing expenses. Maintenance, ongoing maintenance of these things is very rarely calculated in. And there's loaded costs of this stuff too. It's not just, well, what are people making salary? It's what is the loaded cost with all the benefits, the office space, the office supplies that we all embezzle from our employer, which got really hard during the pandemic, but not impossible. And of course, opportunity cost, where when you're building the monitoring system, you're not doing other things that are valuable to the company as well, unless you're a monitoring company. Yes, I know, there are probably better rooms I could make that particular point in, but cool, let's pretend. We also talk about, they always lowball the cost of scaling these things. Like, oh, we don't have to deal with short-term retention of data. We can have infinite retention and conveniently omit the actual storage cost of storing all that data in perpetuity. And it winds up also, forgets the cost of, as you continue to grow, you're going to be adding in new capabilities left and right. It's never set it and forget it, as much as we like to pretend otherwise. And of course, everyone invariably winds up just mopping the floor with some vendor that has stood up almost like a straw man argument. But, you know, whenever vendors complain about that, they're accused of being self-interested. I'm not, I just find it unseemingly. So that's what happens when you wind up dealing with a world where build wins. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum where, we're going to buy these things instead because that's better. Well, what do you see there? Well, a lot of the third-party costs tend to be overlooked entirely. Oh, just ship all your data to us. Great. Well, I can look at the cost of what you're charging me, but I'm in a cloud provider. Data egress is a thing, I promise. If you don't believe me or aren't aware of that, oh, are you in for a fun surprise later? Also, they tend to overestimate the sheer amount of time and energy it's going to cost for in-house. Like, you're going to need to hire a team of 20 people to build a monitoring system. Citation very much needed on stuff like that. It also wildly tends to underestimate implementation costs. It's just, oh, it's so easy, you just click a button and it rolls out to production. Sir, we're a bank. There are a few more steps and boxes we have to check, and for anything even slightly complicated, it has to be integrated with a lot of the applications that you're deploying as well. It is never that easy. And of course, they tend to also do fun things, such as, you know, assuming that the great deal you're getting for year one is what you're going to be paying in year 2, 3, and 4 once you're bought in. Spoiler, it is not. And I get why this happens, but you often over-rely on the very prettily done TCO analyses provided by the vendor as part of their pitch deck, because they've done a lot of these things, and they, of course, are never going to give you anything that says, wow, it turns out we are terrifyingly expensive, buy something else. And it's easy, but it tends to over-rely on that without questioning it too well. My point is that you should be telling a capability story. That's why you're going down the path of whether you build or whether you buy. But that isn't what happens. It never is. Instead, you are making a decision and then backfilling an analysis to justify it financially. And I have never seen this not be true. So as a result, TCOs are inherently bullshit. All of them. And sooner or later, someone is going to realize that applies to other sorts of TCOs too. Like, are you saying the cloud migrations TCOs are not correct? That's right. They're bullshit. They always are. It applies to all of them. So that's how we get there. But regardless of which side you choose, you are going down one of two paths, build or buy. Let's explore the first one of building it out ourselves. Vendor products, well, they suck. And we are special and unique snowflakes. Because I am an engineer, damn it, and if I wanted the most interesting thing about me to be that I cut large checks to companies I don't know a lot about, I wouldn't be an engineer, I would be a VC instead. Now when I say build your own, we're really talking about two subcategories here. We're either going to take a whole bunch of open source tools and then glue them together with duct tape and baling wire and more than a little bit of hope. And otherwise, we're going to wind up building our own bespoke system internally from scratch. That's also known as the "we did it better at Facebook" method. Because you've decided at that point that absolutely nothing in the open source world is going to meet your very specific needs. That's almost never true. Facebook's problems are not your problems. They have different ones. Because what you're doing in almost every case is you're not solving innovative, groundbreaking, world-spanning scale. You're doing resume-driven development. Let's be very honest and call that what it is. You are overcomplicating things for your own career advancement. And that's a bad plan. Incidentally, overcomplicating things for career advancement is in fact the tagline and origin story for Kubernetes, but that's a talk for a different conference. So if you're cobbling a bunch of open source stuff together, what are you doing exactly? Because almost all of those open source products do have paid offerings by companies that specialize in it. Is it that you're cheaping out? Is it it's purely about cost for you? Because let me remind you, this is not something that you're doing in your spare time. Contrary to popular opinion, the $400,000 a year observability engineer is expected to provide more value than arguing on Twitter about what observability means to them for 16 hours a day, one would hope. Your time is incredibly expensive to your employer. It is always more than the infrastructure itself. The engineering instinct in all of these cases is to build things, and I get it. I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but make sure that you're building the right things that get your company to its next milestone. Because I gotta level with you, talking to a whole bunch of the SREs who really like to index over on building these things out, I think you really want to build a monitoring product instead. And I'm pretty sure that this statement, while true, is also going to be a personal attack to an awful lot of you. But look around at all of the monitoring companies we see sponsoring here, exhibiting, and we're implementing in our environments. How many of them arose almost by accident based upon how they did monitoring at their last company or how they wished they had done monitoring at their last company? And speaking from the customer side of the fence, the Cambrian explosion of different tools in the monitoring observability space makes being a customer worse, not better. Nothing, be it a vendor tool or something you built yourself or in the open source world, is going to do a great job of talking to each other. Despite the industry's best efforts at being interoperable, a lot of these things have so far to go. I mean, the OpenTelemetry project, great idea, but I haven't seen it work yet in anything remotely resembling a workable environment. It sounds great, but it works in theory, not in production. Incidentally, theory is the name of my staging environment for that exact reason, but that's neither here nor there. Netflix is a good example of a company that takes building yourself to an extreme. Because they're now a $30 billion monitoring company that gets paid for streaming movies, and okay, great. In 2015, Netflix was spending 6 figures a week on observability. I learned that little factoid from a talk they gave at this zany conference called Monitorama a while back. Stop me if you've heard of that one. And they're Netflix. They evaluated their choices and they were happy with them. I mean, who am I to say that they were right or wrong? Would they do it again the same way in 2022? God, I hope not. But they chose where to spend their creative energies. Any company has a limited number of things that they can meaningfully invest in to innovate on successfully. And I would suggest that you really put some thought into and be honest with yourself in the process of whether or not building monitoring tools or cobbling them together from spare parts is one of those things that is core and central to your business. So that's build. Let's instead talk about buy. And let's be clear, it's never phrased as, oh, let's go buy something instead. It's usually, let's go buy product X. And maybe it's because someone has used it before. Maybe they got tackled by an overly aggressive badge scanner at a conference somewhere and just sort of fell in love with the awesome swag or whatnot. We're never going to know for sure, but they're clearly playing favorites. When they have other competitors, they're often brought in as at the last minute to make it not look like the no-bid contract that it pretty much is. It's fun, and there are reasons to buy, though. I mean, who here has pre-ordered the latest SRE book that's dropping soon? Anyone? Well, at least I assume that it's an SRE book, just based upon the title alone. Because a key tenet of SRE, which comes from the Mountain View region of California exclusively, otherwise it is just sparkling DevOps, is that nothing is ever an engineer's fault. Now, it's sometimes hard to sell that vision to management, which is why vendors are so critical. For only a staggeringly large pile of money, you can throw them under the bus instead of yourself. If it didn't work, clearly you didn't have the right vendor in the right spot of the 15 companies you're slapping together to build these things. Because it's important, don't you know, to approach observability from a position of composability. Now, what do I mean by composability? Instead of one tool, you use a whole bunch of individual fit-for-purpose tools. The problem is, in the fullness of time, people start asking them to do more, and those people are often not customers, but investors or the market, and they want them to do more things. And as a result, you wind up chaining together a bunch of what look like multi-function printers, where, well, we have that one because it's the best at faxing, and that one is super great at scanning, and who's happy here? And of course, all of these vendors are asking for the same slice of your budget, ignoring that they are very far from the only company and product that you've got to buy with that stuff. And as a result, you have multiple products from vendors, none of whom are willing to admit, much less entertain, that you are going to need multiple vendor products for different things. And you wind up with a complete and total mess. Remember, I'm a cloud economist. I see the results of this unfolding on the AWS bill. See, here's what you think is happening, where, oh, we just wind up pulling these things out of CloudWatch when it's in AWS, and then we basically slice and dice these things. Yeah, here's what's actually happening. Each vendor is doing its own relationship, its own things, and when it shows up on the bill, and CloudWatch is your number one most expensive service in all of your accounts, it's usually something like this. Because the best part of all of this is that none of these things work together. They claim to be interoperable, don't get me wrong, but CloudWatch charges per request, and all of these products are making completely independent use of staggering numbers of CloudWatch queries. So what you hope is happening is that a single CloudWatch fire hose is being consumed by all of these vendors. But what actually happens is there are 5 incredibly expensive burning piles of money that are being consumed at once, and good luck tracking down which one spiked last month, because, spoiler, it's not easy. And lest you forget, despite their most fervent wish to the contrary, Amazon is not the only vendor that you're paying for things. I know they have entire teams of people working on this because their product strategy is yes, but they're not there yet. So other vendors clearly want their cut too. And before long, you are spending more on observing the product than you are on building the thing. And we all love negotiating with our cloud provider every few years, but just wait until you get to negotiate with the dozen observability vendors that you have who all pretend that they're your only vendor. That's not a fun job. So where does that leave us on the build versus buy discussion here? It leaves it as a whole bunch of different things here, because it's a problem. If you wind up building, your cost is going to rival the gross domestic product of Belize. It is going to involve so much wailing and gnashing of teeth due to complexity. And of course, you'll get called out by talks at Monitorama for doing it wrong. Whereas if you buy, it will cost roughly the same as the GDP of Belize. There's going to be a lot of wailing and gnashing of teeth. And of course, you'll get called out by talks at Monitorama for doing it wrong. Simple, right? So where does that leave us? Well, it's not about cost. I know, weird thing to say as a cloud economist, but it's true. It's a strategy and a capability story. And because I don't have anything to sell you, well, that's your problem to deal with, not mine. This is probably the most honest slide you're ever going to see at a conference. Mark this day, because it's true. It absolutely is true. There's no way to avoid it. As much as we have to pretend otherwise, we are doing the best we can with what we have. So do I have an answer for you? Well, James Mickens would almost certainly have a better answer for you. I mean, look at his title of his talk. I am the cure is what he said, because he is James freaking Mickens. And I am not. I am the shitty version of James Mickens that nobody actually wants but claims to be able to deliver what he can. I am Amazon Basics James Mickens. I am only barely fit for purpose here. And I don't have an answer, and you're all screwed. I am Corey Quinn. You have been a great audience, and welcome to Monitorama.